I think we're going to get started. Good evening, everybody. I'm Diane Davis. I'm the chair of the Department of Urban Planning and Design, and I'm really excited on a personal level as well as a professional level to have the opportunity to introduce Loreta Castro Reguera, who is our keynote speaker tonight. Just a little comment. Whenever we announce all the awards that Loreta has won in the GSD faculty meeting, I'll say more about that in a second. Anita Beres-Beitia puts up her hand and says, oh, well, I was Loreta's advisor, but as I will underscore several times in my remarks, Loreta's a graduate of the MAUD program. I'm really excited to have you back. I just heard from her that her first essay on water, she wrote in Juan Busquets' class. And I was thinking it's because you're from Mexico City, a city on a lake, so I'll say something about that in a second. But before I get into a little bit of a preparatory set of remarks about Loreta, I know we're waiting to hear her presentation. I wanted to mention that on March 4th, Rania Gosen is going to be here speaking, and then on March 7th, Demetra Fraser, who is the head of the National Minority Architects Association. Oh, is that? No, that's somebody else. Is speaking here for International Women's Day. And you guys can see the poster, and anybody who's on the GST listserv is just getting emails all the time. So take a look at them, and it would be great to have you here. But now let's turn our attention to Loreta. So over several years, I actually can't believe that you graduated from MAUD in 2010, and I came to the GSD in 2012, so one of my I know I missed something that I didn't get here till, in our department until after you had already left, but we had an opportunity to meet several times in Mexico City because Lorena is a very known personality and amazing urban designer who's done a lot of amazing work in Mexico City about water, and I'm going to say a little more about that, frame that for you. So over the years, and I will be interested to know exactly when you started thinking about water, maybe when you were still in Mexico, that Loreta has committed herself to interrogating architecture and urban design's role in the construction of communities, and has done so through award-winning projects, studios, and publications that consider both the shared management of resources and the shaping of collective attachments and affiliations that surround water practices in particular. Much of Loreta's work builds on an examination of Mexico City as a key site for addressing water management issues. And I always assumed that this was not only because water serves as an essential component in the design of all cities, particularly if we want to conceptualize cities as embedded in a complex articulation of physical, social, and natural and cultural, physical and political forces, cultural and material networks, social and natural arrangements in which architecture and urban design participate. And if that's the way we conceive of cities, of course we need to be looking at water. But also, as a native of Mexico City, Loreta was born in Mexico City, this is a city that was built on a lake and whose contemporary and historical character very much to the constant engagement and challenges with water on an everyday scale, flooding, all sorts of other sets of things in the history, in the culture, and the representation. Water is a key thing in Mexico City. So Loreta's work on water has allowed her to forge new boundaries in the discipline of urban design by framing water management as a critical dimension of urbanism in Mexico City and its hinterlands, but also increasingly through the Mexican territorial landscape. And I would call out most recently some of her work in Juchitán and other parts of the Isthmus of Tehuantepec, a region that I myself have been examining with a group of GSD students over the past year or so. Loreta has been an expert guide and a generous colleague and has advised our students on our projects in the Isthmus in Mexico City various times over the last 7 or 8 months. And we thank you for your help and your willingness to share your commitment and knowledge of Mexico water and all sorts of vulnerabilities with the next sets of generations of GSD students. As we are no doubt about to hear, Loreta's design work builds on a deep understanding of the collection, distribution, use, recycling, and disposal of water at local, urban, and territorial scales. all of her work along these lines has led to her recent recognition on a global scale with some major urban design and environmental prizes, which include the Global Gold Prize and Latin America Gold Prize of the 5th round of the Lafarge Holcim Awards for her project La Quebradora, where she was a design director and general coordinator. Maybe we're going to hear more about that. That project reimagines how to manage and educate citizens about water using a site in a relatively impoverished part of Mexico City that has been transformed through the arrival of migrants and over the years has been reconstituted through processes of rapid urbanization. And one reason her water park project, La Quebradora, is so important is that it forces residents in Mexico City and all of us to consider the history and meaning of water management in the social construction of Mexico City and its own self-imaginary. As noted earlier, water management in Mexico City has been a matter of great relevance ever since the city was established. A territory that was once regulated by the implementation of canals and ditches is today managed through pipes and tubes. But Loreta's work, her creative and new ways of seeing this city and water, reveals how past practices used to manage water have not solved, but in fact have exacerbated water problems for the city, which has suffered from continuous floods and water scarcity. Well, and that's an open question. Is it too much water and not enough water at the right time? I mean, there's both too much and not enough water in Mexico City, and that's happened recurrently over the last century, if not longer. I mean, in particular, the historical multi-purpose canals that she's looked at, and some of her work is she's developed with a former friend and colleague of mine, Manuel Perlo, a professor of sociology and urban planning at the UNAM, who's done a lot on the history of drainage and water in Mexico City. And they've combined together to look at the history of the infrastructures, the sewages and the canals and the modern speedways that have been tunneled into this lake bed, but have exacerbated problems of water rather than mitigating them. And Loreta's work highlights the importance of finding new ways of water management, both for Mexico City and many other territories that face similar problems. As a rising star in the urban design world for her work on water, I'd like to think that the GSD deserves some of the credit. You graduated here in 2010 after studying architecture at the School of Architecture at the UNAM, and she also has a master in architecture from Mendrisio Academy of Architecture. I would say, though, that she claims 95% of the credit for her great work because she was a brilliant designer. When she was here, she graduated with a distinction from the department. With a Master of Urban Design and distinction. So maybe we can take 5% of the credit, and maybe all that 5 goes to Joan Busquets, who's over here. But over her relatively short career, Loreta has been awarded many scholarships and prizes, both for her past work and her independent work, including the FONCA Young Creators Program in Mexico. She was a recipient of a Fulbright scholarship. The CEMEX Marcelo Zambrano scholarship was a very competitive scholarship given by a major cement agency in Mexico, CEMEX. And as a result of her work on water and design, she also received the 2010 Druker Traveling Fellowship Award, which is a very competitive award that many people are dying to have and competing for that. It also in 2010, I want to mention that she founded her own practice, Taller Capital, with José Pablo Ambrosi, and their work together, in addition to all the kind of academic work, her prize-winning work that I've just mentioned, their work in their firm focuses on redesigning cities with a kind of challenge to think about densification and infrastructure and public spaces and how those challenges of urbanism are connected to the water question. That firm has also received several national recognitions and prizes, including the 2015 Eco Pavillion award for installing that pavilion and a silver medal in the 2017 Bienialle. Finally, and in her free time, Loreta teaches a thesis design seminar at the UNAM, and I see you've taught at other places. We're going to have to bring you back to teach with us more here. I think you taught a seminar at Columbia that I was reading about, and she's been a guest professor and a speaker at several institutions in America and Europe, written a lot of articles, essays, part of the National Creator System. I don't even know what that is in Mexico as of 2018. And now she's here back at the GSD to share with us all the new developments and new trajectories that she's pursued, maybe not all of them, since she left the GSD several years ago. So without further ado, Loreta, the podium is yours.
Thank you so much, Diane, for all these very inspiring words. They really make me feel much more at home. And of course, more than 5% is given to the GSD. Actually, it's the place where I started thinking about this very important issue of water in Mexico City, with the purpose of understanding how would I be able to return back to my native town and do something that would really help to move things and shake things up. So I'm going to speak a bit of that and of other topics. And I entitled this lecture, "The Dialoguing with the City Through Design," in all aspects, because at our studio, Taller Capital, which was founded by myself and José Pablo, we focus on understanding different issues that have to do with how we approximate to the city. So our studio is based in Mexico City. We are both natives of that metropolitan area, which happens to be one of the largest worldwide, and which we have discovered that can be also the place where we can work permanently, because it's so big and it has been so contested that it gives a lot of possibilities to intervene. We think that the city is the most intelligent and creative invention of humankind, and also that it gives a possibility to be continuously transformed, adjusting to different contexts, to time, to environment. And the example of Mexico City is very obvious, since it was a lake and now there are no traces of water. The city then is our lab, the place where we can experiment, and therefore it's also the place where we are condemned to live, suffering or enjoying whatever we practice in it. This is Mexico City downtown at its current state. We understand the city as our subject matter. And through understanding it, through a process of scrutiny, of really going deep inside its roots, its history, we start identifying the real problems that lie behind the surface of the earth. We then try to construct an ongoing dialogue with whatever happens in the city, if it's about land use, if it's about public space, or if it's about how goods and how services go into the city. And then we produce our projects, which usually give back, and then we are able to build upon this feedback to do the next project. Therefore, our work nourishes from the cultural, environmental, economic, social, and political diversity of the context, which happens to be changing all the time, because the Mexico City in which I started working 6 or 8 years ago is very different from the one we are confronting today. This is an image of the Túnel Emisor Oriente, which is the largest drainage system worldwide, and is a very important part of our work. It's part of what informs our work. So you can see how even what lies underground and unseen is part of what nourishes our proposals. We believe in density and in infrastructural public spaces. And we design precise interventions with a systemic perspective, focusing on these two ways of approaching the city. We specifically work with housing and water issues, with projects that are directed towards solving these two topics. This is a building in one of the traditional neighborhoods of Mexico City, which is right now going through a process of densification, following one of Joan Busquets' advices. And I remember that very well, him saying that Mexico City should be a 5-floor city instead of a 1-floor, and that would really help to bring services more efficiently. So our place of work, our main place of work is Mexico City. And as Diane was saying before, Mexico City was a lake. It has a very, a very characteristic situation, and that one is that it's an endorheic basin. What that means is that all the water that falls in the region or in the basin of Mexico has no natural exit. So it all stays inside in the lowest areas of the basin, forming a system of 5 lakes that originally had a surface of 1,100 square kilometers in a 9,600 square kilometer basin. This situation has been what has moved and what has determined the interventions that have been done in the basin of Mexico. Sorry, I'm going to go back to. So when the Great Tenochtitlan was built inside of the lake, the designers of this city had to understand deeply the context in which they were going to be working. And actually, the example of Tenochtitlan is that of a resilient city, because the city has flooded always, even since ever since it was first established. But through understanding the cycles of water, these people were able to work with the correct infrastructure that would help regulate water and make the city safe from floods. And when floods happened, because they have always happened, the system of urbanization, this system of chinampas, which are pieces of artificial land, were able to absorb water and then to pulverize it through a system of canals that also served as a system of mobility. However, the basin of Mexico today looks more like this. I like showing this image because it's like a robot. It seems like a heart in which you have all these wires that come out and get in. And it speaks of how we have transformed this basin, this landscape, and how today the city survives thanks to a network, a very long network of pipes and tubes and pumps that brings water far away as 128 kilometers to provide drinking water into the city, and then drains water to an adjacent basin, bringing water ultimately to the sea. So no water stays inside the city of water, which is paradoxical. And obviously we face the consequences of having transformed so drastically that environment. One of our main issues is water scarcity. Even though most of the population has the infrastructure to receive drinking water, water doesn't arrive. So when I hear that 98% of the population is served with drinking water, and then see that all these water trucks are circulating around the city, and that the common practice is to have these tanks to fill them and then be able to use water, we start understanding how dramatic and how these political and social factors intervene in such a problem. At the same time, we have floods all around the city. Floods in the east, which is the least developed and least favored area, but also in the west. This is in Chapultepec, very close to the city center. And it happened 2 years ago, and it was a disaster. And still, it happens once and again. And that's because even though we have the largest tube and the most, the tube done with the highest technology, the pipe that brings water into that tube continues to be a 30-centimeter pipe, and it will never become a 7-meter in diameter pipe because it's impossible to dig such a thing underneath this urban fabric. And also we have this growing urban fabric that's starting, or that has already covered large portions of the hillside, causing a lot of trouble, not only to bring services up there, but also stopping the natural infiltration of rainwater, which is the way in which aquifers are refurbished, and therefore also bringing up a problem of aquifer depletion, as together with this water importation system, we have also the water extraction from deep wells. And today we know that Mexico City has availability of drinking water until 2050. So in this context, we try to establish an abstract dialogue through architecture. The way in which we communicate is design and architecture. And it makes this link between the natural, or what remains of the natural landscape, the urban context, and then the inhabitant of the city. Our design process is triggered by all these issues, but also by self-generated restrictions. And this is more about architecture. We understand the big problems of the city, but then we try to shape them through architecture and through making these self-restrictions, which really go into how we express in the field. Our language is inspired by the exercise of reducing typologies. We think about a courtyard as at its essence, or about a platform at what it does in its essence, expressed through synthetic geometry. We pursue spatial richness through formal and material austerity, because we understand where we are working and to whom we are directing our projects. We leave aside any kind of rich finishings to really design the spatial quality of architecture, urban design, and sometimes landscape architecture. So this image of the basin that you have already seen shows the interventions we have done in Mexico City. And what I want to show here is that most of them are in the west of the city, which is also the most developed area and the most favored. But then we have been doing some projects in the east, which are more about public spaces and infrastructural landscapes. And I like to see that because those are the two fields in which we work and from which we live. So somehow housing is what feeds us, and then landscape and public spaces is where we are able to express all our research and all our thoughts. And in that sense, I'm gonna go through 4 projects that take the architectural scale and then go up to the urban design scale, and also talking about how our ideas and our way of approaching the project has become useful in very stressful situations, such as those of the earthquakes of 2017. So I'm going to start with this project called Dr. Atl, which was a painter and is the name of a street, 247. This neighborhood is Santa Maria la Ribera, is one of the most traditional neighborhoods of Mexico City, one of the oldest ones. It suffered a change in inhabitants in the moment where the people owning the big villas moved to Las Lomas de Chapultepec, which is the most favored area of Mexico City. And all the big houses became what we call vecindades, or areas where many people live in an old house. But then from the 90s on, there was a change in land use that permitted social housing to be constructed. And sadly, the way in which this was approached was by destroying most of the architectural heritage of the neighborhood and transforming it into this sort of buildings. Right now, because of its vicinity to the city center, it's becoming once again in the map, and there are many projects to densify these areas and the sites that are there, but with a very conscious idea of protecting the heritage. We are fortunate to have 3 projects in the area. I'm going to show the largest one, which has nothing to conserve in terms of heritage. It was a former workshop, or a mechanical and electrical workshop, but it does put there our efforts for densification and also an approach to start making people sensitive about public spaces. Maybe it's something that has happened in our time, maybe during the last 40 years, that the use of public space in Mexico City has started to become lost. And we have changed the use of the square, of the public square, for the use of the shopping mall. And during these last years, there's been a big effort in the city to put again public spaces on the image of the city. So through these projects, what we try to do is to establish a culture of public space as we pull public spaces into the buildings and make a gradation of the most public courtyards to the most intimate ones, but always linking the street with this series of courtyards. And this is what this image shows. We have a mixed-use building with commerce on the ground floor and apartments on the upper floors. But then we link what happens in the street through these corridors that go through the building and then start becoming the void that shapes the mass, connecting all the apartments, bringing light and air, specifically in this area, which is in the middle of the block, but also making this contact between the deepest courtyard and the street. This is our site plan, and you can see the very weird shape of our site and how we were able to put light in the most deep areas of the site where there's only mass surrounding. Our floor plan showing the apartments, but also showing all these corridors and courtyards that link the spaces. And this series of images guide you through how we connect the street to the inside of the building, always promoting this contact and this communication between neighbors, and finally with the inhabitant of the neighborhood. The stairwell, and then the arrival to the first courtyard, where then you get compressed and go out in another courtyard, and a stairwell that takes you to the entrance of 2 apartments here, but having the chance to identify that there's another courtyard back there. Or this one that sets a rhythm of mass and void, giving the access to the smallest apartments. Always having this possibility, because these are very small apartments. These are 47 square meters, the others are 60, but with this possibility of feeling the spirit not compressed, but all the other way around, because you always have this contact with the public space. And this is the shape of the building. So, stepping out of housing, but not of public space, I'm going to explain you two projects that were very experimental, but that have been, they're really small also, but they have been the trigger for much larger projects regarding the topic of water, of infrastructural public spaces, and of how you can start making a change on a system that has been working in Mexico City for the last almost 500 years. And what's the kind of effort that needs to be done in order not to revert, because we think it's impossible to revert that system of pipes and tubes, but instead to give an alternative of how water can be managed in the city. So this is our vision of the basin. This image is very similar to the one with the pipes and the wires. But what it says is that we are aiming to keep whatever green remains surrounding the mountain, in the slope of the mountains, and to stop the growth of this very large urban fabric through densification, revitalizing whichever bodies of water are still possible to rescue, and trying to give some areas of some caution areas to be able to grab as much as rainwater as possible. This image on the other side is the entrance to the deep drainage system. The deep drainage system is built 150 meters underground. This is the well that brings you down 150 meters to an enormous tube of 7 meters in internal diameter and 8 meters external. And it became the excuse for us to act in this courtyard. This is the courtyard of the an art gallery called El Eco, which is a historical building in Mexico City. It was designed by Matthias Geritz in the 50s, and it had a long history. It was depleted and then recovered by UNAM. And since 2010, there's a competition every year, now every 2 years, for intervening the courtyard with a summer pavilion. In 2015, we were honored with the prize to intervene this courtyard. And while we were thinking about what we would do in the courtyard of El Eco, with all this pressure of Matthias Geritz and having to dialogue with his building, at the same time in which we created a pavilion for holding artistic events, we thought that we should take the opportunity to put the topic of water in the courtyard and somehow start decontextualizing the idea of water issues in Mexico City in order to make people more sensitive about this problem, because water systems are, as I told you, underground. Both drinking and sewage water systems are underground, and everyone, when we open the tap of water, we expect that water flows, and we don't even want to try to understand where that water comes from. So we decided to bring this very big tube into the courtyard of the museum. So we were able to make a visit to the Túnel Emisor Oriente, which is this drainage system, before, and we thought, why don't we bring one of these rings, of these prefabricated concrete rings, into the courtyard of El Eco, and then start at least making people question about what is this and what is this doing in here, no? So this was our strategy, extracting a ring from the underground pipe. And then this is how the ring dialogues with the floor plan of Matthias Geritz, which is very much into perspectives and how mass and geometry embrace the user of the building. And we thought that this circle doesn't look that bad inside. So we did these drawings for the competition. How can this ring become a pavilion for arts? And a model showing how it would be done. So in the end, we didn't propose any architecture, but instead the placing of an infrastructure inside the building. And when we won, we were very, very, very scared because we hadn't figured out how we were going to bring this ring into the courtyard, which is massive. So we were very, very lucky to have good friends. One was Manuel Perlo, actually. And I told him, do you know someone that works in the deep drainage system in the Teo? And he said, oh, yeah, I have my friend Carmona. And he said, you call him. So I went with Dr. Carmona, explaining the idea of the tube and how it would start making people conscious about these infrastructures. And he said, that sounds beautiful. Yes, I can arrange for a ring to be in your museum. And we were very lucky because ICA, which is the largest construction company in Mexico City, ICA was building this pipe. And when Dr. Carmona asked them for a ring, they were very happy because it would show the work they were doing. So in the end, we had a $10,000 budget, which right now is $5,000 because peso has been devaluated. And we didn't use anything. So it was also the cheapest intervention ever in El Eco. And they lent everything. They lent this very big truck, and they moved these beautiful pieces of prefabricated concrete. And they also brought a crane that would place each piece inside the courtyard. And we had this piece for the summer pavilion of El Eco. And many people asking what was this. And I was very happy to explain that this was part of the drainage system of Mexico City, filled with people, but also able to hold concerts and other sorts of cultural activities. The next story is about another small intervention called the Hydric Pavilion. And this project is about water culture in Mexico City. In 2017, we were approached by the Ministry of Environment of the city, and they asked us to make, they said, oh, you work with water, we would like you to please help us with a project of water culture. And we have quite clear what we want to do. We would like you to go and pick 2 different neighborhoods, a more favored and a less favored one, and pick a set of neighbors, and then you go to their homes, ask them how they use water, then you tell them that they have to use it less, and then first you meter the water, how they use it, then you tell them through giving out magnets and flyers and maybe a small booklet of how to use better water, and then you go back, meter, and then you can say they reduced consumption. And then you compare both. And obviously, we had another thing in mind. But we were very happy to know about this project because at that time, we were starting to build La Quebradora, and we noticed that there was a very important need of sensitizing the community about what was going to happen in that space. So I even asked for a Graham grant, and I didn't receive it, to make an intervention in public spaces, a sort of pavilion that would help people understand what was going to happen in that spot with all the construction that was going on. So when we were asked to do this water culture project, I thought this is the opportunity, and we're going to use that money to do water culture in Iztapalapa, which is the place where La Quebradora is, and also in Polanco, which is this very high-end neighborhood in Mexico City. So our first meeting with the client was to tell them that their project was beautiful, but that we had another idea in mind, and that idea, the objective was to make people conscious about how public spaces can also become parallel water management infrastructures. On the one side, relieving the stress from the traditional infrastructure system, but on the other, a very important spot to make water culture and to make people become alert about what's going on with water in the city. So they are also somehow a meter of climatic conditions. And when people understand that their public space, the public space outside of their home, is able to provide them with water and also to mitigate floods, they can become more aware and take care more about these public spaces. So we proposed this, which is the Hydric Pavilion. It's a temporary structure that can be mounted and dismounted in 2 days, and that would stay in the selected public spaces for 1 month. This is how it was built. It's a wooden structure that is covered with a metallic roof, which is able to collect rainwater. And through a system designed by a company named Isla Urbana, this rainwater can be filtered and cleaned all the way to so that it can be able to be drinked. Also, the pavilion had the possibility to hold this permanent exhibition showing how water is managed in Mexico City, what's the history of water in Mexico City, and also some alternatives about how you can help better the situation of water in the city. So this is our water catchment system. And then we had also a cultural program with conferences, with movies, with games and shows for kids, all the ages, to make the community be aware of water issues in the city. This is our container, our rainwater container, and to our surprise, in Polanco, people had the confidence to drink water, which is rare, and in Iztapalapa, they even bring containers the same size as this one to be filled with our water container. So it was a real success, and we included also an arts program. So in the end, it was a very noble project, and we were very happy to make it happen, although we were not able to place it in La Quebradora, but still we placed it in another public space in Iztapalapa and the one in Polanco. The next project is the largest project I have worked in. It's a project we did with the National Autonomous University of Mexico, and that has been going on since 2012 now. I'm very happy to talk about La Quebradora here because ever since I left school, I have been showing the progress of La Quebradora. The first time, it was only the conceptual idea. The second time, we showed the finished construction documents, and now I'm happy to share the stage in which it is, not yet finished, but on its way. So La Quebradora is a project that we developed with the Institute of Social Sciences of UNAM, where Manuel Perló was director, and it's the result of a research that Manuel and myself started in 2012 about hydric acupunctures and how, through very small interventions in which the community get involved, we can start changing the way in which people approach to water and establishing a parallel system of water management which doesn't intend to change the traditional one, but instead to help its function. It was a project in which many specialists intervened, many architects, landscape architects, urban designers, chemical engineers, civil engineers, and all these specialties that you can read here. And even though the process of preparation took around 3 years, The process of design of construction documents took 1.5 years, and now we've been almost 2 years in the construction process. So what seems to be a finish and an ending, that was the time in which we were paid from 2016 to 2017, really is a process that has been taking almost 7 years now. So this is a view of the original, not the original, but the basin with Tenochtitlan towards the east. And this spot is where La Quebradora is. It's in the hillside of the Sierra Santa Catarina, which is this mountain range that goes into the city, formerly into the lake, separating the sweet water lakes from the salty water lakes. Iztapalapa faces the salty water lakes, the lake of Texcoco. Sorry for the quality. I know this image is not very good, but it shows the city of Mexico with the borough of Iztapalapa in the east, and then La Quebradora in the eastern part of the borough, adjacent to this street that is called Ermita Iztapalapa, which is one of the oldest roads of the city. It existed there even before the Aztecs arrived, connecting all the riverine towns. La Quebradora lies in a volcanic context, and it's somehow squeezed between the Sierra Santa Catarina and the former lake. It's at the border of the lake, defined by this road. And today, it crystallizes most of the problems of Mexico City. It has one of the highest population densities, mainly in the Sierra Santa Catarina. It has very big services and equipment, the largest market in Latin America, a very big police station, the jail, the treatment plant, the largest cemeteries in the city. But large as they are not working well for the entire population, because as you can see here, everything is far away. The same happens with public spaces. We have the Cerro de la Estrella, and then this park that was a former dump, which is now working as a park, but not really under the best conditions, because soil hasn't been very well treated there. And here again, almost no green spaces. So, and there's also this income situation. The people here receive less than I think 25,000, between 25,000 and 5,000, 2,500 and 5,000 pesos per month, which is very low. And it's also the example, the best example of this drastic transformation. And I should have added this other photo before this, but I don't have that one, when Iztapalapa was a lake. So you can imagine that in at least in 50 years, this was happening. But if you put an image of 200 years, you would have seen lake, agricultural land, and then this endless urban fabric. And with this paradox, the Heydrich paradox happening all the time, scarcity and excess of rainwater. So what we did with all this information was picking a spot, which is La Quebradora, and then deciding of an amount of a certain number of strategies that would go into this spot and that would help, on the first hand, mitigate floods and better the infiltration of water, but also to treat water, to recycle water, to make a restrained consumption of drinking water, to power the entire project with solar energy, benefiting at least 28,000 people in a direct way, but in a larger sense, 2 million inhabitants, triplicating the tree count, facilitating mobility and accessibility, and then making it a spot to better water culture. This is the way in which we found La Quebradora in 2016, in a crossroads of Ermita and Minas, which is the road that brings people down from Sierra Santa Catarina. and also a spot where people are able to access the public transportation. So this is somehow a very important mobility exchange site. And with this very big empty lot, all walled, and where people just appreciate it as a space of insecurity, instead of understanding that this space was already working as a place where the runoff of that came down this street was taken into mitigating part of the floods that happened here. You can imagine that this is where flatland starts. So this is already the soil of a lake, which is impermeable by nature. So Iztapalapa by nature is a place that floods. And with the urbanization of the hillside, runoffs go real quickly down. And then we have these floods that are very hard to control. So for the design process, we did a lot of participatory design meetings, and it was very good because people were really eager to listen to what we were doing and to participate. And we did also activations of the site. And we came up with a project in 3 axes. The hydro environmental axis, where we established how it would work as an infrastructure. The urban landscape axis, where mobility and vegetation were established, and then the social cultural, and that's where people were able to intervene. And we have a very varied program of activities, and also an important service that is toilets, and that's because even though people have the furniture at home, they don't have the water to serve the furniture. So we were asked to put toilets so that people could use them before they go in the public transportation in the morning or before they go home in the evening. This image shows how the water system works. We have 2 entries of runoff, and we conduct them into these 2 natural basins that have the characteristic of having ground cracks in this border that help water be infiltrated really quickly. Before making water get infiltrated, we have a system of grids, of metallic grids that hold all the debris and all the trash that is thrown in the streets. This is not one of the best served areas in terms of trash recollection. And additionally to that, we placed a system of water treatment, a combined system of a traditional water plant and a wetland system, in order to have a quality of water that would be good for the toilets, for watering the entire park, and also to fill water trucks for other public spaces around this one. And finally, we had the rain catchment water system in this water mirror placed in the center of the park that would somehow become the meter of how, if it's raining or not, and if it's time to take care of water or not that much. And also to drink water that's recollected in these 2 roofs is filtered with a system as the one of the pavilion I showed before, and people are able to drink this water. And all this combined with and linked together through a set of platforms of courts and paths that would make mobility easier for people coming from the west towards the north, from the east towards the northwest, from the north towards the south, up the mountain, which formerly had to go all around and now are able to cross in a faster way. And also having the possibility to use the services that the park provides. This is the image of the park with the mountains behind, and you can see how the urban fabric goes up. So if we didn't protect this spot, it would, in some years, without any doubt, become urbanized. And then our design strategies, where we looked into history and into how have people in Middle America traditionally approached the steepness of the terrain. And we rediscovered, because it's not something that we hadn't seen, but re-understood the platform as the means of approaching a site. So we decided to platform the entire site, and in every platform, stating a program. Platforms were created from the roof of some constructions to the land itself and linked through pathways until we get to the deepest part, which are the basins that keep the runoff. Also, we used local materials. We were very committed to not using materials that do not belong to the area. So our main material was volcanic rock, as we have a basin filled with volcanoes and with rock. And something that was very regarding was that we re-established the masonry, the rock masonry activity, which was lost because people now build with cement block, and we somehow reintroduced this traditional way of building in the basin. And these are some of the objective images. Some of the programs, we have a library that through the space links the street and the squares, and also holds the system for bringing water into the basins. And always procuring these cross views so that people can feel safe to go through the park. So there's always someone that can see you from the upper platforms or from the terraces constructed in the buildings. Each of the squares we built has a traditional tree of Mexico City, either native or very well acquainted, like the jacaranda. So each square has the name of the tree that is planted in there. And then all these cross views, and always thinking about how it would work at night. So our design, the illumination of the design illumination was not intended to make any atmospheres, but instead to work as a stadium, so that people would be illuminated and feel safe to cross this park even when it's dark. In 2017, the construction process started. We handed in the project in May, and the construction started, and we were out of the construction process, not able to supervise our work, and only able to visit it sometimes. And this was a shock for us, because we were not able to see if they were really applying the project as we had delineated it. But apparently it was working. These are the platforms, the rock platforms. And then by the beginning of 2018, the mayor of the city came to the site, to the construction site, and said he had the money to finish the entire park. And actually, they gave the money to finish the entire park. And the park in September 2018 looked like this, somehow around 70% of its construction. We were very excited to see how buildings were getting built, although we saw also that the project was being changed, at least in the architectural part. We even won this prize that Diane mentioned, and we felt really confident about Quebradora being finished. But to our surprise, there was a change in government on last December, and the day in which the new government entered, the construction site was stopped. And right now, we are in a process of restarting to convince the new authority about the virtues of this project, hoping that they reopen the activity maybe next month. So what I have learned from this one is that it never ends. You adopt one of these projects and then you are tied to it forever until we hopefully make it work. Next time I come, I hope to say that. And then finally, I'm going to show a small intervention we are working on in the city of Juchitán. This is not Mexico City. It's at the south of Mexico City, very south. in the state of Oaxaca. In the Isthmus of Tehuantepec, it's a project that we are working together with Nayeli, who is sitting here, Nayeli Quiroz, and a studio of Oaxaca called Root Studio. And this is an image of the Isthmus. You can see how close it is to the sea and also to this mountain range that somehow makes a wall, a limit. And after the steepness of this mountain, the entire area is a flatland that is only 4 meters above sea level, with several towns and Juchitán as the main town in there. It is characterized by many things, but among them we have the Beast, which is this train that is famous because it brings immigrants from the southern border into the country. And we also have these wind turbines that generate a lot of energy. It's a very windy place. And these have been a matter of discussion in the area. The area is also very prone to natural disasters. There are a lot of floods that happen in a yearly and even monthly basis. And on the other hand, they are very prone to earthquakes. In the 2017 earthquake, September 2017, there was a lot of destruction happening in the area, mainly in Juchitán, where 75% of the buildings were damaged. This is the city of Juchitán, showing this river that's called the River of the Dogs. I cannot figure out nutrias in English. So that river crosses through Juchitán and goes all the way to the sea. And this is this was the former image of Juchitán before the earthquakes. And today, you can imagine the disaster that happened there. The main church levitating, the main church levitating. The urban fabric almost completely destroyed. And then we had a very good coincidence because this company, MK Illumination, it's an Austrian company that was prone to give money to restructure a public space somewhere in a town where there was a lot of destruction. They didn't even know where, but they already had a project. So they had this very nice square with 4 houses, 1 in each corner, and then a big light bulb in the center. And they came to us and told us, we want you to review our project because we want to put it on somewhere in a courtyard in a town. And fortunately, we had just come back from Oaxaca from meeting Joao Boto, who is the owner of Root Studio. And he had just talked to me about how the destruction in Juchitán was very bad. So it was a very good meeting point of all these energies. Joao working in Juchitán, MK Illumination wanting to give money, and then ourselves wanting to do some nice project of public space in these towns that were very damaged. So we organized a visit to Juchitán. Here's Root Studio, MK Illumination, and Taller Capital. And we did that meeting to find a spot where we could work in the reconstruction, but also to set a paradigm of how we could take the problems inherent to Juchitán and make them an example of how you can transform these problems into opportunities. So we picked this site, which is the site of an installation called CRI Hidalgo. This is a place managed by the community with a small building that had a lot of damage during the earthquake, but that Root Studio then refurbished. And this building works as a library and as a space for homeworks for kids. But it lies in this public space that is very depleted and in a very bad condition. So we thought that we could act in the public space, add a wood and metal shop, and also work on remaking all this open space. This is the former site, or the current state of the site. And then understanding these problems of debris, of trash, this very important issue that all the debris product of the earthquakes is being thrown to the river, and then the situation of floods, which happen all the time. But we also found these opportunities of how people are really understanding that they can reuse the material from which their houses were built as pavement systems, but also as wall systems. This is the Gaiola Pombalina construction system. It's a system of Portugal, and it was used after an important earthquake and fire that happened in Lisbon in 1785, where most of the city was destructed. So by that time, the king had this idea to reuse the debris in order to rebuild the city. And most of Lisbon is built with this construction system. And then how could we attach to the culture of the site, to this cultural, how can we create these cultural landscapes and these interventions with which people really get acquainted and really feel as part of what they are and where they live? So we thought about the geometry of the pattern of the Isthmian embroidery and how we could use it to design our corner where the CRI Hidalgo is, the former building, the new proposal, and then the public space. And in this site plan, you can see how we placed the workshop, somehow making an entrance, and then how through the geometry of the Isthmian embroidery, we were able to make a step well and also to make steps for the courtyard, the basketball courtyard, leaving open spaces for play, but also for gathering materials during disasters, which was one of the big issues. So in a sense, we had a space where we could get to where we could keep water, filter water, and use water, and also become a space to archive materials, or otherwise to have spaces for play and leisure. This is how the water system works. We take the water that falls in the roofs, but also the one that falls in the square. We bring it into this open well, which is then filtered by a system of gravels and kept in here and then used mainly at the toilets, but it can also be used in other ways during disaster. A detail of the paving using this material, the bricks that are recovered from the houses that suffered damages. And then the design of this detailing as the steps for for keeping an eye on the basketball court. And then the design of the workshop, which we intended it to become a paradigm of how to reuse debris to construct new homes. So we left it apparent, a steel structure filled with debris, and then a very light roof. So this is how we would like the space to look like. We took all this wall for graffiti. Juchitán is one of the towns that is characterized for having the most or the best graphic artists in Mexico. Actually, Toledo is from here, who is our most important artist. But also a place where water becomes part of the imaginary and where people can walk and traverse, but also do some sport. So it becomes a loop, a complete loop of leisure, culture, sports, and education. And well, through all these steps and showing you like the different scales of projects we work on, I hope you enjoyed the lecture, and obviously I'm open if you have any questions regarding the work. Thank you.
Thank you, Loreta. I was wondering, looking at all of this, how you have multiple purposes. You educate, obviously, in the university, but what about the role of educating politicians, both past and the ones that are right now in power? How do you harness this agency that you have through the work that you've already done, but also through the design culture and the baggage? How do you get across to these people?
Yeah, well, that's the hardest part, and politicians never want to be educated. But what we have understood is that when you take a topic that is really a problem, people want to know how to solve the problem. And when you bring them a solution, when you tell them, if you manage it this way, or if you understand it through this lens, you can really make a change, that's what they really like. When they understand that they can be able to make an innovative change in the city. And that's somehow what we are hanging on to. No? But I think it's the hardest part, and I should be taking some politics lessons, I was telling this afternoon to Santiago, because it's never easy. You never really understand where or what's the line they are trying to move, or how, or if they have issues with past politicians or not. So it's something that you really need to become very sensitive to, and then understand how, from your point of view and from your side, you can push what you are able to do in order to make a benefit first for the city, but also to make them understand that they can take profit of that intervention. Yeah, but it's not easy. I don't think we educate them. It's hard. Yeah.
I can tell that your spirit permeates your project in a positive manner. Your first project was reminiscent of what you might have learned at the GSD, because I could see that there might have been roots of Fumiko Maki. In his first residential project, had similar steps and penetrations. And in the movie Roma, congratulations, Mexico in general, there was a vernacular house involved in which the family lived. And it was very funny seeing the Ford Fairlane, park in the narrow entrance and scrape the mirror up against the side of the wall. Is that the area in which some of this densification is taking place, so that, a single family house like that may become your 5-story higher density? In that case, the maids lift up a narrow stairwell up to the top. And there were many things going on inside that movie, some of which was also political in nature. But could you describe the nature of how the densification is taking place inside? Is that a neighborhood in which that might be happening?
Yeah, definitely. Actually, densification is mainly happening in those central neighborhoods. Colonia Roma, where Roma was filmed, is one of those. And many of these old houses are being, if they're not protected by the Bossart agency, they are able to demolish these houses and build something, a new building upon them. The first building that I showed, it was just a building with these beams crossing through. That one is in the nearby neighborhood to Roma, which is Narvarte. And usually there are no house protection agencies there right now. So all houses can be torn apart and rebuilt and transformed into buildings, which is a pity. But instead, in Santa Maria la Ribera, where the other building is, the one that I explained largely, There are a lot of houses from the beginning of the 20th century there. So the Beaux-Arts agency is with all of its presence in there. And actually, the other two buildings, which are not yet constructed, they are respecting the first piece of historical house. Most of them are very dilapidated. Almost, they conserve the facade, but then the rest is torn apart. So what we are doing there is to conserve the original structure or the original party of the building, like where the courtyards were placed, and the main facade. And then we can build in the back. So yeah, it's the process, and it's how I started the process of transforming the city, hopefully in a good way. It doesn't always happen that way, but we do need to put more people inside and stop spreading, because you can imagine now there are some housing developments that are called to be in the city, but really are about 30 kilometers or more far away, which have been abandoned and have created a lot of social and political issues.
Hi. So thank you for a great presentation, very beautiful and sensible design, very elemental or essential. I'm curious about if you have identified institutional frameworks to canalize the funding for your projects or to in a way assure continuity. I'm thinking about how the Emerald Necklace was justified as a water management project or some parts of it, and then 100 years later, the Army Corps of Engineers invests on the Muddy River restoration project. So have you found ways in Mexico through the Ministry of Environmental Protection or whatever the equivalent is to do things like this, or through regional entities?
That's a very good question, and actually it takes most of our energy today. So we were able, with the Quebradora project, and because of the prizes it won, to make it, to publicize it, obviously. And many agencies that are sensitive to this kind of projects approached us. Actually, today, there's a big effort that's being done by it's called the CAF. It's a bank of Latin America with its base in Ecuador, that was interested on how these kind of projects could be used for both for Mexico City, other cities in Mexico, and also in Latin America. So we were receiving a funding from the CAF to develop 3 other projects in Mexico City, hoping that they can be taken by the government and done in the next years. And with this view, and that's why we call it hydro-urban acupunctures, of establishing a system of this sort of public spaces, which can be designed per thousands in Mexico City. So what we're doing is trying to set a typology so that typology can be later reshaped and re-understood in diverse spaces, not only in Mexico, but in other cities.
I think I'm going to ask you one more, maybe the final question. Can I stand up here with you? So, it was a really great presentation. I guess I wanted to ask you if you're willing to reflect a little. Now I'm putting on my hat as like UBD chair, but reflect a little bit about not just your personal journey coming to the GSD in urban design and then moving back to focus more on water. In the presentation, it was interesting. You started with the housing project on Dr. Adel, which is a urban design project, clearly. And then you start moving into a terrain. I don't want to identify false boundaries, let's say, between landscape architecture and urban design. But I mean, you are working across a variety of domains. You have a larger project of education about the infrastructure and the resources that create cities and create urbanism, and that's the focus on water. So I guess it's a twofold question. One is, are there other resources or aspects of everyday urbanism besides water that could play the same role as water, that really force people to think a little bit more about the systemic structure of what makes it possible for agglomeration in city? Because you're also thinking about your water projects are juxtaposed against the need of densification. So you as a scholar know we need densification so we don't sprawl, so we don't undermine our water resources. You see them as connected. I'm not sure citizens see them as connected, one. Number two, are there other resources that we need to be focusing our attention on that we can use, like other kind of parks or public educational projects besides water, that can really be central to changing the narrative about the city? And then I know it's too many questions, but I'm wanting you to think a little bit about this is the final question, what should we in an urban design program, what are the new things that we need to be sensitizing or teaching our students to be aware of and to move into those domains? Because we don't have that many urban design students that have landed where you have landed, right? Many come more from landscape. So I'm claiming you here in urban design, but you still have those sensibilities. What are the implications of your work for where we need to be heading in new types of projects that really create a new consciousness about urbanization, urbanism, and densification? So do you have any thoughts on that?
That's a good question. No, well, I think it all goes back to research and to that deep understanding of where you're working and why you want to work there. And I have to go back to both the places where I think I learned the most. In the realm of architecture in Mendrisio, which was a really strong school in that sense, and in the realm of the city and of urban design and of the territory at the GSD. And what I've been trying to do through my practice is to channelize my excitement about the aesthetic form of architecture through a useful media or a useful means, that is how architecture is the piece or is the way in which we are able to deal or to dialogue with the environment, both the built environment and the natural environment. So how I would describe and why I think it can make sense and how we do it in the studio is that by understanding that beauty and that form is important, we approach the problems of the city and trying to pack them in the most compelling way so that they really are appreciated, not only because of the solutions they present regarding, in this sense, water management, but also because they become a space where the spirit gets cultivated. And that's very important, and that's somehow that we are really trying to move towards to. So there are other resources, there are other important resources that could make this combination. I think one is, it's not maybe a resource, but it's mobility, which is always a problem, a very big problem in most of the big cities. Another one is soil. Soil is also very much affected by any type of urbanization, and that could also guide the process of problem selection and how you approach them through architecture. And that's where I see the combination of all the disciplines related to design. And I'm like very happy to have chosen to do architecture and urban design, and always with this focus on landscape that the GSD gives, because it really broadens the palette of options with which you can work and with which you can understand the the site or the terrain and the world in general, no? And that's when I understand that architecture, as seen in the 20th century and maybe even before, really puts together all these professions that then they were later divided and specialized in different ones. But when you have like an overview of all of them, you are able to understand that you can act through design. In the end, design is our language, and we, through design, are able to dialogue with the different conditions to which we are confronted. Now, that's the way we have been taught to dialogue, not through politics in our case, or through economy, but through design. And that's how I think the profession should be understood, really making us sensitive to the different aspects, to the different scales, which are always hard. It's not the same scale that the architect works with than the one the urban designer or the landscape architect is used to working. That's something I sense a lot with my students. They are bachelor students and they are architects. So when we pose the urban design scale, they have a lot of difficulty on understanding it. And somehow I think that's the exercise we should be doing, how the architect is also able to get the other scales, because many times architects are confronted to solve problems in other scales, and they are not giving the best solutions because they don't really get the problems of these other two scales that easily. So as much as we can sensitize ourselves with these different scales and the problems that are inherent to those scales, I think we can become better designers, understanding the problems in which we are able to work out.
That is an answer that we want to have quotes on the UPD webpage about urban design. No, that's a perfect answer, and thank you so much. Let's give a round of applause.
Thank you very much.